Welcome to Rethink You, bringing you ideas, inspiration, and motivation to start living the life you were created to live. Here is your host, author, trainer, speaker, and coach, and founder of Rethink You, Kim Levings.
Hi, and welcome back to the Rethink You podcast. My name is Kim Levings, and I'm excited to announce that this month of July 2021, our theme is leadership. And I have some great speakers to bring you on this topic, and I know you will enjoy this month. Before I do that, and the reason I'm focused on leadership is I wanted to let you know that I have launched an exciting new product initiative at kimlevings.com, and that is called Reset. Reset is a leadership journey of transformation towards a transformed and positive culture. So if you're on a leadership team and perhaps that team needs to hit the reset button for whatever reason, check it out at kimlevings.com/reset, RE-SET. So let's talk about today's speaker. Alan E. Nelson has a doctorate in leadership from the University of San Diego. He teaches leadership-oriented classes at USC and at the Naval Postgraduate School. Dr. Nelson is the author of 40 books, and is the founder of Kid Lead Incorporated and Lead Young Training Systems, a project-based training curricula for 3 to 23-year-olds. His YouTube channel is titled Lead Young, where he offers free instructional videos for parents, educators, and young leaders of 15 to 30 years old. The Nelsons have been married for 40 years. They have 3 grown sons, 2 granddaughters, and live near Los Angeles. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Alan E. Nelson. Well, welcome back. Here I have Dr. Alan E. Nelson. And Alan, tell us, you've been passionate and focused on leadership your whole life. So as I welcome you to the podcast, why don't you tell us some of your story and how you got started on this path of leadership?
I think, when I talk about my whole life, I literally, now that I study kids, I literally think of when I was a kid. I grew up in a small farm in Iowa, and I'm an only child. So there's pretty much just one leader in my family, and it wasn't me, it was Dad. So I loved going to school because at school I could A, escape chores, and B, I could relate to people my own age. And as I look back, it was one of those things where at recess time, kids would come up at recess and say, Alan, what are we going to do today? And I just thought that was normal activity. So let's play soccer today, or let's play softball today, or whatever. So, that probably started my interest. And sometimes I got dinged for that, just like kids in school do. That's one thing I write about. And we've researched how kids in schools, many times their leadership potential gets dwarfed because teachers don't like it when the kids get more influence at times and take students' attention away from the lesson or whatever. And sometimes I did that. So I got a C a couple times in conduct, and that didn't go over well in my family. So then as I got older and started leading organizations, started 2 or 3 nonprofits, I was always intrigued by it. And John Maxwell was a mentor of mine at just around graduate school. My wife worked for him on staff. So that intrigued me even more. So when I had the opportunity, I started studying it in a doctoral program at the University of San Diego and started writing books on leadership. And then at midlife, I got to the point someone said, life is like a roll of toilet paper. The less you have left, the faster it goes. So at midlife, I said, oh my gosh, I'm writing these books for adults and teaching classes, but I said, there's got to be a better way to raise leaders. So I started this journey is about 10 to 15 years ago, and actually looking at what leaders look like when they're young. And so for this last really 10 to 15 years of my life, that's been my main passion. And we started an organization called Kid Lead, and we have a project-based curricula that we teach people how to use it literally around the world. So that's kind of been my journey as a little leader, as a big leader, and then as a leader developer. So now we try to get to leaders while they're moldable, not moldy. So it's kind of a whole different paradigm shift.
But you actually, thank you for that, Alan, but you actually started your career as an entrepreneur yourself, right, in business. You didn't immediately go into teaching leaders. But so, what lessons did you take from that early part of your life into your leader development journey?
Yeah, most of my leadership was done in areas like demographic areas like North Orange County, South Orange County in California, and then later Scottsdale, Arizona. So we were around constantly. We lived around people who were high achievers and go-getters and CEOs and such. So I think working with them and coaching them just taught me a lot. I think one of those life lessons I realized as I look back, at midlife, I thought I tried to be the expert in my area, but I realized that it's really about bringing out the expertise of the team. And I think one of those life lessons I learned is that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room to be the leader. In fact, one thing we know is that leaders are above average IQ, but they're often not the smartest. Henry Ford said, I hire people smarter than me all the time. So I think that was one of the things, and it probably came down to ego. Sometimes I thought, if I'm the leader, I know more about the company, the organization than anyone else. And so I think that's one of those life lessons I learned looking back is I wish I had done better tapping the intelligence and the expertise of the people in my organization as opposed to thinking I had to have all the answers.
Right, that's a good example. And I think, do you still come across leaders that to this day fall into that trap? And I'm reminded actually of the saying that used to say, if you're a leader, there's people following you. If you turn around and there's no one there, you're just taking a walk. So do you find that you're still having to coach that out of leaders these days about that heroic syndrome that I'm the boss? And
I think that, and I think, a number of other things. I wrote a book not long ago called The 5-Star Boss. And it's really kind of designed for new bosses. And what I've noticed, and not all bosses are leaders, some of them are managers. And I always try to, in my courses and books, try to distinguish. But what I think is common when people get promoted to be a boss, a manager of a team or a certain level of the organization, I think they assume that to be a boss, you need to be bossy. And you really don't. And so I see that as maybe one of the most common things when people are in charge. They feel the onus of responsibility, but then they start directing people to do this. And then people don't like that. None of us like to be bossed or micromanaged. So I think that's one of the more common things I see. And the goal is to, first of all, teach them that that's not the way to lead. And second of all, the book also tries to help them understand how organizations behave. I teach organizational behavior at the USC and the Naval Postgraduate School. So we've got all of these really sharp officers or, really sharp students that are just learning how organizations operate. And that's kind of a toolkit for leaders, because many times leaders, they are kind of good at leading, but they need to know how the organization behaves and what to expect from that. So, it's loaded with lots of ideas and researchers, people smarter than me who have gone deep into a niche. And then my goal is to bring it out and say, here's how you can use it. Here's a tool. Do this, don't do that kind of stuff.
Right. Now, those are some great examples, Alan. And I know that I'm not going to make the assumption that all the leaders are in agreement with you and I about the difference between a manager and a leader. So why don't you give us your explanation and teach us for a minute as to how you distinguish between those two?
You bet. So I define leadership. I think, first of all, you need to define your definition of leadership, right? I had 700 books of leadership in my library, and I'd say probably only 5% of those books even attempted to define it. And I thought that was kind of ironic. Everyone's talking about leadership, but it's like talking about fruit. And some people are talking about bananas and some people are talking about oranges. And you're saying, well, So I think you ought to have a stake in the ground, because leadership is a buzzword. My definition is leadership is a process of helping people accomplish together what they would not or could not as individuals. And leaders are people who catalyze leadership, and leading is how they do it. So I'm very clear, and I have a narrower field, especially because I discovered in the world of young leaders like kids and students, oh my goodness, really, they don't talk about organizational leadership. Most of the time, they're really talking about self-esteem, character, self-actualization, service. They're all good stuff, but it's really not about leading. It's about other stuff, other things. So I'm very, very specific, and I think that's the first thing, is to figure out how you define leadership. And then when you define that, then you realize, hey, that's different than what managers do. Managers tend to be more holding the system in place. I mean, I joke, I said, you always need a manager, you don't always need a leader. Because if everything's going smooth, avoid leaders at all costs, because they're going to try to change things, right? So if you need things changed, that's when you need leaders. And so I think even though there's a complementary relationship, you look at a lot of the startup companies that have done well, they had one leader and one manager, the kind of the chief operating officer who understood systems, understood how to make things, run. They were really good at dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and they married, so to speak, partnered with someone who was more big picture, visionary, transformational. And so they're complementary, but really they are at the end of the day different. And I think it's rare, it's possible, but it's rare to be good at both. If you're good both at managing and leading, that's a pretty amazing skill set.
That's a good distinction, because it does require two different hats, so to speak, and they actually need each other almost in that dyad model, which I know is becoming extremely valuable and important. And I often say, to your point, Alan, if people are in a crisis, you want a manager, not a leader, because the manager is just going to get it done in the midst of the crisis, right? So that's excellent. But so I know that you still keep lecturing at USC. What would you say are some of the lessons you're learning as a teacher there?
Well, I always love students, right? So it's not, that they're a top school and others I've taught at were not. I love people. But at the same time, I realize that we all have different capacity levels. It's kind of like Starbucks. I'm a Starbucks fan, but when I go there, I know never to ask for cream, because if you ask for cream, they take, half to an inch out of your coffee cup. So when I'm paying $50 a gallon for coffee, I want the whole cup. So sometimes I use that as a metaphor. There are tall leaders, there are grande leaders, and there are venti leaders. But regardless of your capacity, you want to be full, right? You want to reach your potential. So I think, and that's one thing that research really never tells us, do we have kind of a set capacity, or can we increase our capacity? Well, it's the chicken and the egg, do I really increase my capacity, or do I just reach the potential of my capacity? My hunch, at 62 is that I don't think you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. When I see these 25-year-olds come on America's Got Talent or The Voice, and they say, you just reach for your dreams and grab them, I was like, okay, that's a 25-year-old. In all due respect, that's the decade of ideology. I think that we're all wired. I think that we all have a wiring from our parents, from our creator, a combination of both. But we have the capacity, and a lot of, in the past we've said anyone can be a leader, but in the last decade or two, genetic research has actually said leaders are made and born, not made or born. So we know now that 30 to 60% of, depending on what trait you look at, is genetic. So we inherit it, just like skin tone, eye color, hair color. We have a predisposition to lead or not. And so my goal, my research has really been focused on the predisposition to lead, so we can identify them early and get them young. So going back to your original question, I'm constantly learning from my students. I learn from them. I like to joust with them about their concept of leadership and, challenge them. But they challenge me too. So I love what I do. And yet at the same time, I teach because I haven't figured out to pay the bills with my nonprofit. I'm a social entrepreneur, which many times means underpaid.
Right. You mean you live your mission, but you have to go and do other work to pay the bills while you're pursuing your mission.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's wonderful. But I really love the way you phrased, your interest in focusing on moldable rather than moldy leaders. Talk to us a little about that shift, because I know you suddenly said, there's maybe more to life, but talk us through that from a personal transition point of view. What took you into working with much younger folks? And then I want to unpack some of that.
Well, there was a guy, I haven't talked to him for years, but George Barney, you know, Kim, who George is. And yeah. George was kind of a futurist, right? He would base all his work in research, but then he would come and do seminars and books on, here's where we're headed, here's where you need to, like Wayne Gretzky, I don't skate where the puck is, I skate where it's going to be. So he was the Wayne Gretzky, and he would help us figure out, in the nonprofit world, in the faith sector, where things were headed. So I got to be friends with him, and I said, hey, George, I'm thinking about a change. I love leadership development, but it just seems like the market's full of people talking to leaders about leadership. And it seems like a lot of them just seem stuck in their ways. He said, have you ever thought about kids? And I said, well, I got kids, but I don't like work with kids. And it took me a while to figure out what he was talking about. He was talking about talking or figuring out how to get to leaders while they're still kids. So that sort of, was a little bit of he lit the fuse in my brain, and it just exploded. And I said, wow, that would be novel. And I found that no one is really doing that. So, so it's one of those things where you kind of, I don't know if you've heard of the Heath brothers. They wrote, a bunch of books made to stick. I talked to Chip Heath. He teaches up at Stanford, and I said, can you look at our website and, what do we need to do to make our website and our message stickier? And he said, let me ask you a question. He said, are people coming to you saying, we need this, or do you have this vision that says we need to do this? And I said, the latter. He said, that's the challenge, that I think we're so focused on leaders after they're grown up because they get employed, they have money, that's where the research is. So all of our focus on leaders really has been, well, when they're adults. But we know formatively they've already established themselves in their character, their cognitions have already peaked. So in a survey done, it was published in a blog by Harvard Business Review of 17,000 managers, and they asked them this question: when was the first time you received formal leadership training? And the average age was 42. 42. So again, that's way past the time we're priming our character, moldable. And that's also significantly past the time when our cognitions are most elevated. The problem is that people who work with kids and youth, they focus on pedagogy, and that's teaching. People who study leadership, they focus on adults. So I'm here trying to build a bridge between the two entities, of leadership, study, experts, and then how can we hook those up with kids? So I think that goes back to why to be honest, most schools are not very good at developing leadership potential, because it's about conformity, compliance. And of course, leaders are not that. So some of your frequent flyer miles or frequent flyers down at the principal's office are budding CEOs. They just, are waiting to get to real life to do that. So.
Right. Oh, that's so true. They don't conform. They don't fit into that pattern. When you first got started with Kid Lead, how did you get going? Because you spoke about the struggle on the website. So if you think back to those days, what was your first program? Who were your first clients? And what was that experience like for you?
Well, I think it was kind of a divine connection there, because I was working for group publishing. And I was still thinking these thoughts, and they offered me a job. So I said, well, heck yeah, paycheck is better than nothing. So I went there, and it was a great environment because they do all experiential curriculum. So that's their expertise. So I would see how they would design their curriculum for kids and teens. And then I would, at nights or weekends, I would develop a team, and we started, going to churches and schools and saying, hey, here's an idea we have. How would you like to, donate some kids to this project? So people, we had trainers and social workers and parents, and we have a variety of people. And I would write these activities, and I'd say, okay, let's see how this works. And so after about 3 years, we were just seeing some really good results. And it was a little school in northern, just outside of Fort Collins, that piloted the program, and they were so thrilled with it. And we were so thrilled to see how the leader type kids latched onto it that I pulled the plug on my paycheck and benefits and followed my wife to her job in Monterey. And then we started developing the curriculum. So literally just about 3 months ago, we finished the age and stage curriculum for ages 3 to 23. And so we have literally hundreds of projects that kids lead their peers in to try to accomplish together. And then they receive coaching. And then we try to train adults how to coach the kids. So that's kind of the journey of Kid Lead and how we got going.
That's wonderful, Alan. And I know that you also have the Lead Young channel on YouTube with videos that are instructional videos. Can you give us some examples? And also these exercises and curricula, is it just for churches, schools, or both, or is it for parents? If a parent happens to be listening to this and they think they have a leader on their hands, where can they find the resources? What would you recommend?
Well, most of our resources are available on Amazon, but to learn about them, you can go to kidlead.com or leadyoungtraining.com. And we have a lot of free articles, but there's also a free assessment there. And that's what I think is interesting, because you take the assessment on a child. We have one for 3 to 6 year olds and one for 6 to 18 year olds. And you don't have the student take it. You have the adults, parents, teacher, who's ever seen the child in a social setting will take it on the child. And then it gives you kind of an estimate of the likelihood of leadership giftedness. I didn't know this, but until I started studying it, but actually the U.S. Department of Education recognizes leadership as a gift in the gifted and talented programs. And California and 13 other states adopt it as well. Problem is, going back to schools, the schools, they only have a little bit of bandwidth for activities that are not, are academic, and those are consumed with arts and athletics. So very few people in the educational system really have studied leadership or understand leadership. So it's really not a surprise they don't get it. So usually it comes down to private schools, churches, or parents saying, hey, I want to develop my kids, leadership, because savvy parents realize you can't raise a leader the same way you raise other kids. Every child is different. You know that, I know that. So even though they come from the same gene pool, they act differently. So I think it's an encouragement to say, if you've got one of those little challenges in your life of a child, maybe they're a budding leader and maybe you need to take a different approach. So what our curriculum does is helps kids work together. An adult facilitates it, and it could be a simple activity like stacking cards. And we say, Kim, okay, you're the team leader. You're going to wear the leader lanyard around your neck. Get the rest of your team to do this. You want to see if you can build a stack of cards 36 inches high, and you've only got 4 minutes to do that. So strategize and then go. And then, you see them do this. And I tell you, the kids who are leaders, they love this. In fact, they say this is the parents say that they think that's the best part of their week. Well, yeah, because it's the only place they get to truly lead and don't get punished for it. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, free stuff. And then if you go to Amazon, you can buy the rest of our stuff.
That's awesome. And I know that you've experienced some great stories along the way of people that you've seen significantly benefit from this. Do one or two come to mind that you could share with us? Perhaps a child that's gone through the program for a few years and you've seen an impact on their lives? Because I know you do this work globally too.
Yeah. So a lot of the popularity of our program actually is in Canada, not the U.S. And I remember specifically one church, they ran the program for probably about 8 years. And so the kids would go from junior high to high school and then graduate. And one of the most touching emails I got was from this trainer who basically said that the president of the college called her up one day and said, "What are you doing with these kids? We have 2 kids from your church and they are amazing." And she said, "Well, they were in our Kid Lead program and they grew up as leaders." And he said that they're amazing. So how many times does a college president call someone up and say, "These kids are amazing. What are you feeding them?" Another
Oh,
story
that's
took place
fabulous.
inside of Monterey is this agrarian community called Salinas. 80% of the lettuce we eat in the US is grown in Salinas. So heavy duty number of Hispanic families and a lot of gang activity too, if you can imagine. So I'm doing a training for this group, and it was very interesting because one of the leaders came to me and said, "Okay, we're about to train the kids." And he said, "One of the kids joining us today got kicked out. He got kicked out because he's a troublemaker and we wouldn't let him in our program." And it was a challenge. He said, "Guess which one he is." So, about 15 kids walked into the room, and literally within a minute, I said, "The kid over there in the purple shirt." And his name was Jorge. And he said, "How did you know that?" I said, "I could just tell by his swagger." I mean, he had that swagger like, "I'm the alpha in the room and y'all better comply." And I watched during the activities, and it was about training the trainer, but I'm observing the kids too. And he was a great leader. And afterwards, I just wanted to affirm him some way. All I could do is think of is to give him my business card and I say, "Jorge, I've noticed you are a great leader." And this is a kid who's probably 12 years old. But I said, "If I can ever help you, let me know." So, that's just an example. And there are many examples of kids. And a lot of times it's teachers or parents or youth pastors who say, "Oh my gosh, I've got these kids." And I said, "Yeah, you need to channel them differently because they're the budding leaders in society. And we want to start them off right so they go to the light side, not the dark side."
Right, right. And that's so true. Also, I know from gang activity that they've discovered, people, troubled youth often find their identity in a gang because they haven't got the identity of family. And it's a problem, as you said, if you've got a few alpha dogs, that's, I think, when you start getting violence because they don't know how to channel that leadership energy. That's powerful, Alan. Wow. Um, as you think about training youth, and then as you do your own teaching and writing in the topics of leadership, would you be able to isolate 1, 2, or maybe even 3 different specific issues that will determine the success or failure of a leader? Be they behavioral characteristics or behavior patterns, trends that you see that would set people up for good leadership. I like the way you say leadership on the light side rather than the dark side. So, is there a trend that people can spot within themselves or others?
Well, I think that assessment I alluded to will uncover a lot of those. But
Mhm.
I do a lot of teaching for Naval Postgraduate School. It's one of the 2 graduate military schools in the U.S. And to be honest, we spend so much on the military in our country. We could do away with almost all of that if we would just not have evil leaders in the world. So really, evil leaders didn't start evil. They started innocent. They were good kids, but whatever reason, they went to the dark side. So yeah, I think identifying them early, and I think we talk about a lot of the characteristics, but I think 3, you asked for 3, is first of all, leaders tend to be pretty strong-willed. So not all strong-willed kids are leaders, but leaders are usually strong-willed, and sometimes they will grade us the wrong way. But they will stand up to authority figures. They will stand up to people more powerful than them if they feel there's inequity, unfairness. Another quality is they tend to be initiators. So they initiate activities at school. They start clubs. They get elected, as captain of the soccer team, because they just sort of get things going, and others know intuitively that we need to get organized. And so in life, really, leaders are just organizers. One of my books is called The O Factor, because I didn't want to talk about leadership because everyone says, "Oh, I want my kid to be a leader." Oh, well, it's not about what you want. It's about how they're wired, right? A child is not a book to be written. It's a book to be read. So the O Factor means the ability to organize. So kids who are good at organizing activities. So they initiate, they organize. And then I think a third quality of kids is they're strategic thinkers. So leader type kids, they can see the big picture, but that they can break it down into steps. So that takes organization to the next level, right? They develop a plan, and then they say, okay, Kim, you're going to do this. George, you're going to do this. Ralph, you're going to do this. And they sort of have that ability to think big picture, but then break it into steps. And that's called strategic thinking.
Wow, those are powerful. I just love that quote, Alan. Children are books to be written, not books to be read. I mean, are not books to be written. It's supposed to be, yeah, I love that. It's because we try and sort of make children become everything that we were not, right? Yeah. I think parents fall into that trap. Well, I never went to college, so you got to go to college and take that pattern. So that's a powerful quote. Thank you for that. And those three, I'm sure people can see those in young children. So I encourage them to take that assessment. So now to sort of change direction slightly, because that's been a powerful discussion, but I also wanted to call attention to your book called 5-Star Change. You mentioned it earlier, and this is about estimating the pain factor of change in any organization. So still in the topic of leadership, but maybe moving away from kids a little and focusing on organization. Talk to us about 5-Star Change. Why did you write it, and what's the impact of that book? Why should people read it?
Well, 5-Star Boss is about how to be a boss of excellence. 5-Star Change is how to do change excellently. And, I put it in a narrative format to make it easier to read. It's not pithy. But over the years, I observed change, because that's what leaders do. The leaders change things. So I observed what went well, what went poorly, and then I developed a model. And as I taught it in the MBA classes that I taught in, students would say, oh man, at the end of class, the reflection was, I love that change model. So I said, okay, we've gotten enough feedback. We've honed it and tweaked it. So I just said, let's create a book with that. And it's really about, it actually gives kind of a mathematical formula to estimate the efficacy or the level of pain. And the four things you look for is you look for the umph of the leader. Is the person in charge actually a leader? And the less leader-like they are, the more difficult change will be, because leaders by nature tend to be better. The other thing is the influencers. Are the influencers for or against whatever you want to change? So you want to identify the influencers, and we show them how to do a graph. Are they for it? Are they against it? Are they wired for change, or are they wired for not change? 70% of people by nature are change averse. So that's why change is so difficult, because by nature, we tend to be very reticent. And then you look at the size of the change, that's called impact. The bigger the impact, the slower you have to go. And then speed. So that's the fourth factor, is speed. The faster change has to happen, the more stress will be created. And stress, of course, is something that people resist, and they can only handle so much. So the longer you have, the better. The less impact, the easier. And the stronger the leadership, the better. And the more the influencers are for you, the easier it is. So then we give a little mathematical formula to then come up with different categories. Is this going to be painful? Is the patient going to, die on the operating table? Or is this going to be wonderful? And then we have one phase at the end, is what we call overripe, where your efficacy actually goes down because you waited too long. You waited for everyone to get on the bus, but now you've lost your visionaries and you've lost your go-getters. So it's kind of a model based on Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation, which is a classic book on change and how humanity does and does not accept change. So yeah, it's an easy read, but I think your people will find it very helpful.
Powerful. Yeah, thank you for telling us about that, because I know you write great books that are easy to understand. So Alan, as we come in for the close here, I know that I've told our listeners our theme this month is leadership. And as they walk away, I know this has been incredibly informative. I know I've learned a lot. I've taken nearly 2 pages of notes here of really good quotes and takeaways. But as listeners kind of move on with their day after listening to this, what 2 or 3 things would you really like them to remember, either about you or about leadership?
Well, I think one thing is to recognize leadership early, right? Recognize it in kids and youth. Leading is not just an adult verb. It should be a person verb. If you're wired to lead, begin them as early as possible. Well, the classic quote I like is, if you want to change the world, focus on leaders. But if you want to change leaders, focus on them when they're young. So that's kind of what many times I'll end my YouTube videos with, or our books. I'll just plaster that over because I think it really helps us understand that bang for buck leaders in society are the ones that make history. The masses don't make history, leaders do. Leaders lead masses. But again, how do we change leaders? I think the best way is to get them while they're still squishy and wet cement.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Great takeaway. Thank you, Alan. Anything else that you wished I'd ask that you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
No, but Kim, I'm thrilled to see you again. You are both a good manager and a good leader. I can tell you have that rare combination. So you're kind of what they call a unicorn. But I'm thrilled, and I know that your people do love what you do and will be benefited by what you do. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you, Alan. This has been wonderful. I've learned a lot. I feel like I want to now attend more of your classes. So thank you for giving time in your busy day today.
You're welcome.